This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with remarkable folks who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and my guest this week will probably have a movie made about her one day. Things never came easy for Yanely Espinal as the daughter of Dominican immigrants, but she worked her butt off and won a full ride to Brown. That's when things went south. She quickly accumulated credit card debt from self-described financial ignorance. But she educated herself and paid off that 20 grand in just 18 months. Yanely now leads financial literacy efforts nationwide, working with lawmakers to mandate personal finance education in high schools. She's the host of the mega popular YouTube channel MissBeHelpful and the author of the new book, Mind Your Money, Insightful Stories and Strategies to Help You Reach Your #money goals. Her journey proves that circumstances does not define destiny. Through purpose and perseverance, we can build the future we imagine. Yanely, how are you?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this chat.
Me too, because financial literacy is sort of a passion of mine. Because a few years ago, I was working in a radio station in New York, and we had this young guy on who's like our street reporter. He ran into the studio one day, just angry. He's like, "Can you believe what the business department did to me?" I'm like, "Well, what'd they do?" "They signed me up for this thing called a 401k. They're taking my money out of my check. I want my money now." So then we had to sit him down and explain to him the benefits of a retirement account and 401ks and blah, blah, blah. But this was a 20-something-year-old white kid, middle-class family. Parents are well-to-do. I think mother was a teacher or something like that. Yet he had zero financial literacy. And that's just a kid who was who's living a pretty privileged life. I can't imagine what kids who are not. So talk to me about this financial literacy problem right now in the U.S.
I love, first of all, the passion, because you match mine. And I can tell you, that passion comes from my personal experience growing up in the New York City public school system, having taken so many freaking classes. I mean, I just remember having my academic workload, like I was just trying to keep my head above water. I was taking all these AP classes. I was going above and beyond at my school. And, I graduated, went to college, got all these credit cards, and never once did I have a class in all, 20-something plus years of school, did I have a class that taught me what to expect when I was getting into building credit, when I was getting started with bank accounts, how to choose the right one, what the difference is between them, understanding investing to build wealth, retirement accounts. So, I felt like this is ridiculous. It's a no-brainer. It should be a no-brainer that students need to learn about financial literacy in schools. And while the national conversation right now, I would say it's actually a little misguided or misinformed, because most people will say, we're not learning financial literacy in school. This is a problem. It's not happening. Full stop. It is happening. It's just not happening everywhere. So there is a gap that we need to bridge. But when we go around touting it's not being taught in schools, I cringe a little bit, because that's discrediting all of the efforts of these amazing educators that I work with almost every day in my work. And I see the lesson plans they're creating, the activities that they're developing to teach students about banking, budgeting, investing, taxes, insurance, paying for college. I mean, you name it. And so it is happening. But here's a bit of the stats behind it, right? We have 50 states. Everybody who lives in the U.S. knows that. Right now, 23 of those states have a full semester requirement for graduation. That is a full semester of personal finance instruction. So just like you have to take algebra, just like you have to take, biology, you have to take a full semester of personal finance to graduate in 23 states. All the others just got to do a little bit of catching up.
Wow. And those 23 states, how many of those are recent? Because I feel like I'm a Gen Xer, Yanely, so proud card-carrying Gen Xer. That wasn't something I was taught. So is this a pretty recent revelation here with these 23 states?
100%. All of them have been, I would say, fairly recent. So the very first state to do this was in both of our lifetimes. It was in 2008, right? Because of the Great Recession. And that was, huge, rocked the world, not just the country that we're in. And so that led a lot of lawmakers to start thinking about, okay, how can we prepare the next generation? Because in our recent history, the pandemic could throw people off. Imagine back in the Great Recession of 2008, when everybody was losing jobs. It rocked us so bad that people didn't have the savings. People couldn't get access to credit. Folks couldn't afford to buy groceries. I mean, things were really tough. And so they wanted to figure out where to infuse lessons to help people be able to weather those types of storms. Because the reality is economic downturns are going to come and go. They're going to happen. It's not something that we can prevent. It's just the way of the economy, economic cycles. They go up and they go down. And so lawmakers decided we're going to get started with a lesson on financial literacy in high schools, and we're going to build out this course around saving and budgeting and understanding how to prepare for the worst, having an emergency savings fund, knowing the difference between a regular traditional savings account and a certificate of deposit, which is a little bit more for a long-term savings goal. This type of instruction started in the state of Utah in 2008. That was the first state ever. Before 2008, it could have been taught inside of an economics class, or, maybe you had a home ec class, but it was completely elective. It was like students could opt in if they wanted to, but they weren't required to take it in order to graduate until 2008. From when I joined all of this work was 10 years after that, so 2018. And at that time, there were 5 states. So in 10 years, we were able to quintuple that. That's one about every 5 years. That's a lot of time to just make these changes. So change takes time. But from 2018 to 2022, we saw the most growth we have ever seen historically in terms of financial literacy in schools. We went from 5 states to 18 states. And then this year in 2023, we've gone from 18 states to 23 states. So we are seeing a lot of momentum.
Wow. So it's good news for like Gen Alpha, but the millennials are pretty much screwed. And sort of the older Gen Zs. But look, there's no reason basically you built your career on becoming sort of a financial literacy influencer. So there are now places to go and see people like yourself be able to connect with an audience that maybe normally wouldn't have gotten it until these 23 states signed up. Yeah. So you've been fighting the good fight. And a lot of this is very personal to you, like you mentioned, and you have sort of been living this American dream. And even though I look whiter than a member of the Brady Bunch, I'm a family of immigrants. My mother was a Cuban refugee. My father was from Spain. And you talk about growing up in an immigrant family. Yes. And there's something I want to pick your brain about. My family never talked about money. And the idea of entrepreneurship for immigrants, coming from my perspective, was like alien. The idea of you should get paid every 2 weeks, do your job, shut up, and that's it. That was pretty much how I grew up to. And I think a lot of immigrants can relate to something like that.
That's right.
And your family, very similar. I think your dad worked in kitchens, in restaurants. And so it was not something you actively talked about. Right. Do you know why? I mean, I can't explain it for my parents. So do you know why?
Well, I mean, I talk about this in my book, right? And there's a whole chapter on banking in my book because I do think that there is a missing piece when we start talking about money and financial systems in the U.S. We forget that these systems are all fairly new. I mean, women couldn't use a credit card on their own without a father or a husband to go with them to open the account until the 70s. That was not that long ago. So we have this understanding that the world is how it is and it's always been like that. No. This is all just decades in the making. Some of these systems didn't exist when our grandparents were getting started with their finances. So in the chapter where I talk about banking in my book, I talk about historical perspectives on the way that money has worked, specifically in the U.S., right? And when we think about how that affects folks that are coming into the U.S. as new Americans, folks like our parents, they have to come into a new system and start to adapt to all the new ways that things happen, right? But they don't just wipe their memory of the way that the systems were back in their home country. And the reality is the U.S. financial infrastructure is pretty strong compared to a lot of other countries. So if you're coming to the U.S. from another country and immigrating here, chances are you've been burnt a couple times from the financial sector in your home country, whether that means corruption in the banking system, political corruption, whether that means that there was a communist regime that made you fear, the way that money moves, or big government. But whatever it is that you've experienced, it sort of creates this financial trauma for that generation of new Americans. And so what happens is they carry that and they pass that down to their children. So then you have kids like me who didn't really see a debit card in their house, a check, a credit card, or my parents didn't even have bank accounts. They were cash only. And where does that come from? That comes from a lack of trust in financial institutions. And it's rightfully founded because financial institutions did burn a lot of folks in other countries. And so that corruption made them think, I don't want to put my money in an institution where I'll come back tomorrow, try to get my money out of the account, and it's gone, or my money's gone, or I have half as much in there and nobody wants to answer my questions. And, police won't help, lawmakers won't help. This happens in other countries even today. So the fact that we are so quick to forget how much new Americans have endured before arriving here we need to really check ourselves and understand that where they're coming from, it's founded on a lot of reason and logic and fear from things that they've experienced. But that's why the education is the most important thing right now. If we can educate them on things like the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, which is an agency of the federal government that protects our money in a bank up to $250,000 per person per bank account. That's incredible. A lot of other countries don't have that type of infrastructure and that type of protection and insurance for your money. So this is where education, I think, is just so critical.
And on the subject of your parents, what did they think when you told them, Mom and Dad, I'm going to do this for a living. I'm not going to have a basic 9-to-5 job. I'm not going to collect every check every 2 weeks. I'm not going to have a regular, basically have to go into work the same time every day all my life. What was their reaction to that?
They definitely didn't understand. My dad has that type of experience. He's worked in jobs where, odd jobs, the hours are weird. After the restaurant industry, he became a taxi driver in New York City for a couple decades. And, you make your own schedule, you make your money. But he saw that as like a struggle because he didn't have an office with a 401k and a team to manage and a fancy business card. Those were things he aspired to that he never had access to because of his lack of education, his little English speaking abilities, the small network that he had when he arrived here, a very small social network, that he just didn't have access to these things. So when you see your child who all you've been doing is working so hard for them to be able to attain those things that you wanted and you couldn't access, and then they say, oh, I actually don't want those things, you freak out a little bit. So my parents, they were completely confused by my choices. They were very proud of me when I first graduated college because I became a classroom teacher. Now, at that time, I joined Teach for America, which is a very prestigious program, and they toss you right into the neediest schools in the country. And so for me, I went to Brooklyn, right where I grew up, and I started teaching in a turnaround school, which means the school was just on the brink of complete and total failure, being shut down. And this was a chance to save the school. They brought in all new staff. We had to kind of create a whole new culture at the school. And I was a first-year teacher there. So, I learned so much on that job. But a couple years in, I was like, okay, I know that I'm not going to retire as a teacher. I love this job, but I'm exhausted. It is everything. I give everything to these kids. And you never hear thank you. Kids don't think to say thank you to the adults of their life for all the hard work. They just think this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to teach me, feed me, and deal with my tantrums.
Right.
And so I quickly realized, okay, I'm going to pivot. And so I started working in private education. Again, they were very proud of me. I had a fancy title. I was doing my thing in a corporate environment. And then after that job is where I said, I'm going to pause and I'm going to decide how can I funnel my passion for personal finance in a way that allows people to learn everything that I wish I knew so they don't make the mistakes I made. And I just started looking how are people learning online and what's happening? People were watching YouTube videos. People were reading blogs. People were listening to podcasts. And I said, okay, this is where I need to be. So I quit my job. I started a YouTube channel and my parents were like, what are you doing?
They got at church that day? Did they start praying for you? Was that part of it?
My mom, it's funny. My mom, I would wake up in the middle of the night sometimes and my mom would be praying over me with that whisper voice. Anybody out there has a religious mom, you have had this happen to you. But she would pray over me. She was definitely worried about me. But the funny thing is for me, I didn't actually do just one thing like the full creator route for a long time because I was posting videos on YouTube, creating content. And this nonprofit organization came across my content and reached out to me. And they asked me to have a conversation just like this one on a podcast that would go out to teachers. And then in 2018, 2019, I decided to join that organization. At first, I was there full time, just traveling, doing teacher trainings, creating curriculum in financial literacy. And then in 2021, I went down to a more of a part-time role. And my role changed, which is where I got involved in advocacy. So we have another affiliated organization that does travel the country, meets with lawmakers and education leaders, and actually pushes for bills to be introduced into the legislature so that they can propose requiring financial literacy for a full semester. And I've had success with that work since 2021. We've gotten bills passed into law in the state of Florida, in Michigan, in West Virginia, Indiana, Connecticut. We're seeing a wave across the country of this work happening in a legal way at the legislature level, not just community building and grassroots ways.
I love that. And so does your mother still do the rosaries over your bed at night or is that stopped?
I gotta say, I think my parents have given up on worrying about me because now I published a book and they're like, oh, but author.
That's awesome. And speaking of the book, I want to talk about how you thread the needle. Because now you've had years of teaching and teaching teachers, but how do you teach folks? And this is the only way I could phrase this, but how do you teach them without coming across as insulting? Like, go to the bank. It's not, and not that you do this, but like, go to the bank, you speak to the banker, you go, like, I know you don't do that, but how do you break things down in such a simple way that doesn't insult anyone's intelligence? Because I think that in a way is tough, because we all assume that we've mentioned like all these states, they don't have financial literacy. If they're coming from another country, they have, like you said, this financial trauma. So they know about banking. They maybe just don't know about the odds and ends. So how do you thread that?
Yes. Okay, so you start to thread the needle by asking and inquiring. You have to meet people where they are. And this is why I think so much of the financial literacy that has happened over the past few decades before this new movement for it to happen in schools, this is why I think a lot of that didn't work. And this is why I think a lot of community types of organizing for financial education empowerment doesn't work. Because they come in and they're like, we're going to teach you what you don't know. It's like the savior complex. They come in like, we bet you don't know about the difference between these accounts. We bet you don't know how to take full advantage of your local credit union. We bet you don't know. Instead of just asking, what do you know? What don't you know? What do you want to know? And then crafting what you're going to offer them around what they need, where the gaps that they have exist, not where you in your mind believe the gaps exist for them. And I think I probably learned this from being a teacher. You can't just walk in and start teaching your students vocabulary words. You first have to assess where they are. What terms do they know? Which ones do they not know yet? And then you build your instruction around what they don't yet know. But you have to first survey them, assess them, ask them questions, quiz them. You can't just assume what they know and don't know. And this happens all the time in the financial space. Even now, as a grown adult, I've walked into spaces and I'm sitting down to have a meeting and somebody will just assume that I don't know these terms or these types of accounts. I've had financial professionals actually say to me, well, you don't have to worry about that. That's too in the weeds, but you just got to understand the big picture stuff. And I said, oh, no, it's not too in the weeds. I fully understand that I work in financial education. So the assumptions in the space, and I understand where they're coming from, because it's true. The average person walking down the street probably doesn't know the difference between a bond fund and an equity fund. They probably don't. But you can't assume that everyone doesn't know because the average person doesn't know. You have to just ask, because you don't know who knows what and what people have experienced. So I think it just puts a bad taste in people's mouth when you come in and you just start with your own agenda rather than working with them to say, what do you need and how can I help you bridge the gaps that exist for you? And for a lot of communities of color and low-income communities where I tend to really focus my work, I find that the gaps don't really exist in the banking, that they have debit cards, they have bank accounts. What they tend to not have is wealth building accounts like investment accounts, brokerage accounts, IRAs, 529s, health savings accounts, 401ks. This is where real wealth is built. You don't build wealth in a savings account, especially not a traditional savings account with a meager little interest rate that's not going to get you anywhere, even in 1,000 years. So what we need to be talking about is, sure, you can have your high yield savings account with a few months of your emergency savings fund there, but we've got to be teaching people where the real wealth building happens, which is in investment accounts.
Love that. And one of the darker sides of financial illiteracy is predators and predatory lending. Talk to me about the current state of that, because I know a lot of work has been done to spread the word on people like, don't sign up for this credit card, don't sign up for this kind of loan. But how bad is it? And I do know that they take full advantage of immigrants and folks coming in who can't get a credit card through normal channels, so they're doing these other backwards things. So talk about that.
Yes, it's actually getting a lot better, which is good. The problem is that this is a state-by-state issue. It's the same thing with education. When I talk about what I do for my work, and a lot of people will say, well, why don't you just go to the education department at the national level, and have Secretary Cardona just wave a wand and just create a law that requires all the states to teach this? I go, if only it were that easy, right? Education is a highly localized issue in this country, which means you cannot pass a national education law that impacts local schools. Right. The local schools follow laws from the local states. So the state is going to decide at the state level, not at the federal level. That means the state's Department of Education or the local school districts, that's where all the power is to decide what gets taught, how it gets taught, when it gets taught in the school system. It's the same way with the laws and regulations around predatory lending. When we think about payday loan centers or check cashing places, when you think about, places where they're, just loan sharks, right, that are in the communities, these types of places are regulated by local laws. So in one state, it could be completely legal for you to set up shop and offer payday loans at 300, 400, 500% interest. Mind you, in a state right nearby that is outlawed and illegal. So it just looks so different across the country. A couple years ago, they did a national study, and they have a map online where you can actually see how bad the interest rates get. They can be as low as, 40%, 50%, and as high as 700% interest on these payday loans, which, for me, the most predatory and the worst type of way that you could borrow money, even if, no matter how badly you need access to cash quickly, the worst way to do it is to walk into a payday loan center and give them a blank check. And then, they will issue you a loan, and then you come back in 2-3 weeks. And if you can't make a payment, you just give a flat fee, say $50-$60 to extend the term of the loan. So now you're in this cycle of paying $75 every few weeks to extend your loan and getting tacked on 700, 600% interest because you can't afford to pay the principal that you borrow plus all that insane interest on top of it. So this is how people get trapped in these debt cycles by predatory lenders. So we really have to keep an eye on our local legislatures. We have to keep an eye on our state leaders and hold them accountable to make sure that they outlaw things like 700% interest, which, come on, that just should be illegal everywhere.
And I always talk about the key to generational wealth being real estate. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I feel like that's how you're able to build generational wealth, by building a house. Then all of a sudden you collect equity, and then when your kids want to have a house, you have money to forward over to them. And I think that's a key. We're recording this podcast the day after it was announced the mortgage rates were now over 7%, like 7.04%, something like that, something crazy.
Yeah.
I'd love to get your take on, the idea of generational wealth and how real estate plays a part. And now the fact that folks are going to be handcuffed because these interest rates are just ludicrous. Speaking of ludicrous interest rates that you were talking about.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It's happening in real estate right now in so many different markets. So here's my take on that. I think that any investment that is a cash flowing, appreciating asset is a great way to build generational wealth. So I don't like to say, well, the real estate market is how you build generational wealth. No, the stock market is how you do it. No, this is how you do it. Listen, any cash flowing asset that is going to appreciate over time is a great candidate for generational wealth building, because all of them are going to have tax benefits that we can, take part in and benefit from. They're also going to have special accounts or special rules that will allow us to benefit from doing things for our children. So to pass wealth down from one generation to the next. And so this is just what we need to focus on. All of our energy needs to go on purchasing over time, cash flowing, appreciating assets. Now, in my experience as a born and bred Brooklyn girl from New York City, it's very hard to get into real estate in New York City. In the 90s and 2000s, it was getting a little harder. And then after 2008, forget about it. It's been near to impossible for anybody with average income to purchase a home in New York City. So I have had a very hard time with real estate, just being that where I grew up, the environment around real estate market has been tough. Had I traveled out or looked at investing outside of state, really, done more, great, maybe I would have been able to benefit and take real estate as a larger piece of my portfolio. But to this day, I'm 33 years old, and a lot of my investment portfolio is really just good old stocks. And for me, I don't buy them individually. And I think that's the trap, is that people think when you buy real estate, you buy one house, you start with maybe a multifamily or maybe a single family home. And so people are so used to thinking of a unit of one item, one house, right? And that's the problem. When you go into the stock market, you can't just have interest in buying one company's stock, because what you're doing is you are completely erasing the basic 101 rule for investing, which is to diversify your portfolio. The stock market in the US has almost 4,000 different companies that have publicly traded stocks on a stock exchange that you can buy. So why would you get one out of 4,000? But you don't know if that one is going to do well and the other 3,999 are going to, you don't know. So what you should do is diversify your investment portfolio. A lot of real estate investors do this as well. They invest in multi-family property, single-family home.
Commercial.
They invest in commercial property. They invest in different apartment complexes where they're able to rent to tenants. Having a truly diversified portfolio looks like having lots of different types of investments in your portfolio. So for me, I think that's the educational piece that we need to be talking about, is to build generational wealth. You need a diversified portfolio of cash flowing, appreciating assets that you can pass down to the next generation with little to no tax impact for them when accepting that money, because that's the piece. My family has a house, and we split it with another, my uncle, who, another part of the family. And very recently, I learned that back in the 90s, my dad and my uncle, they were just in and over their heads. They couldn't keep up with all the payments. They were scared they were going to lose the house. So they moved, they put the house in the name of their firstborn sons. And now, knowing what I know, I'm like, oh my goodness, the biggest mistake you could ever make is to move the ownership of the property to your children without passing it down to them, because what you've done now is essentially just given them a huge tax burden. So, and again, without the education to understand this stuff, you can easily make a misstep in real estate, in the stock market, in any type of investing. So the education, man, that I will come, and that's the hill I'm going to die on. We got to be, really pushing financial literacy education across all of these aspects of finance.
It's funny you mentioned about the fact that the idea of being a New Yorker and owning property is just like a foreign thing. And so I lived my entire life in the New York City area. 3 years ago, me and my wife located to Charleston, South Carolina. We built a house. The idea of me building a house in the New York metro area, I would have to be like, a multimillionaire, a stock, what do you call those?
You have to be you have to be a fifth generation Rockefeller.
Right. So, and I think that's why that's a big problem that's going to happen in a lot of these cities. I mean, people that feel the importance of home ownership, or being in a community where you can grow a family affordably. You as a New Yorker, are you ever going to, is there going to become a moment where you're like, I just got to get out of here because this is not good for me. I mean, it's hard for me. I did it in my 40s, so you're still young enough, but I just don't know how enough people, if you're in your 20s and 30s and you love the New York lifestyle, which I did, being able to go out to different restaurants, shows every night, you have a huge amount of people, diverse group of individuals. But the idea of setting roots down and building a family, it's just, like you said, unless you're a fifth generation Rockefeller, it's just not in the cards. How do you think about that?
This was the hardest decision that I had to make recently, because my entire family is in New York City or around New York City, right? And I have 8 siblings. So it's my mom, my dad, plus there are 9 kids. And then, of course, they all have their kids. So I have 10 nieces and nephews. It's a big family, and I'm such a big person when it comes to family, love spending time with them, especially, my nieces and nephews. And in 2021, my partner and I actually decided to move out of New York City, and we moved to Miami, Florida, where I've been since July of 2021. And it's interesting because if you had caught me anywhere on the street in New York City in my 20s, you would have caught me yelling, I'm never leaving New York City. I was born here, raised here. I'm going to stay here. 11221 till I die. 718 all day. That was just, there's such a sense of pride for where you grew up, for being from New York, and, understanding what it's like to live the life of a New Yorker, not just to move to New York City for the big dream, but to be from there. There's something that made me so gritty and, just a type of person who has the resilience that nobody can mess with me. I'm thick-skinned. I'm going to get what I want. I'm going to work my butt off until I reach my goals. And if I don't reach them, I'm going to die trying. That's just such a New York thing. And I witnessed it, moving to Miami. There's definitely a small little bit of a community here around entrepreneurship and finance and, a lot of crypto stuff happening.
Startups, yeah.
Startup space is kind of coming here, right? And so there's a little bit of it, but it's not the hustle and bustle, the culture that you get in New York City. It's slower paced. People like to be casual, strolling down the street. I'm like, move out of my way. Come on, I gotta go. It's and that I don't think you ever lose that, but you notice it when you go other places, how life is just at a different pace. So I 100% miss that part of New York City. But to your point, moving to a different state has actually allowed me to be able to consider and explore real estate, to actually, recognize the impact on taxes. In New York City, you're paying a federal tax on any income you earn, a local tax to the state or your state tax to New York State, and a city tax because if you live in the 5 boroughs of New York City. So you're being triple taxed. So your income has to be significantly higher to be able to afford to pay a triple tax and still live off of the remainder after all of those deductions to your income. And I just feel like you're on a constant hamster wheel trying to increase your income to be able to afford that. much like a lot of folks in California feel the same way with high taxes. So I think when you start to, explore other states or living in other places and you look at all those different facets, it becomes something that, it's like, all right, maybe that's medicine I can actually swallow, because at first I couldn't imagine myself living anywhere but New York City. I talk fast, I walk fast, my energy. I mean, it's just, where am I going to be that I don't stand out like a sore thumb? And I think, eventually you just get more comfortable with it. And moving in your 30s and 40s is it's tricky, because I think a lot of research shows that you're already well established in your community group. Your friendships are already pre-established. By the time you're in your mid-20s to late 20s, you don't really make new friends.
Yeah.
So I really liked that I moved in my early 30s, because it sort of forced me to challenge that. Why am I just going to be comfortable in my comfort zone with the friends I have, with the people that I know? Like, I want to constantly be doing new projects and meeting new people. And if moving is going to be a way to force you to do that, why not?
That's great. And in the book and in your life and a lot of the stuff you talk about, I get like a Yanely Espinal like movie in your future, because you definitely have sort of like this rom-com thing of like this gritty immigrant's kid goes to incredible higher education. Then all of a sudden, because she wants to fit in, she racks up all these credit card bills and then finds her way. I mean, am I crazy here thinking that your life is a rom-com or what?
I actually, in one of my chapters, I started that way. I started, every movie where there's a glowy filter around the girl and then lock eyes. And it's like, I do feel like a lot of the things that have happened to me feel like a scene straight out of a movie. And some of them have been, very hopeful, uplifting, inspirational movies. And some scenes have been straight out of a horror flick. And I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to stay alive. And so I think the cool part of that is that my book has accomplished what I wanted it to accomplish, if you got that sense from it, which is I wanted it to feel like storytelling. I didn't want it to feel like, I'm just touting all this information and I'm just trying to get all this into your brain in a way, because I didn't get it. So I just want you to learn all of this. Here's a bunch of vocab. Here's a bunch of jargon. Here are a bunch of new concepts. You got to memorize it all. We don't learn that way. Humans, we crave stories. We crave connection with others. And the way you connect with other people is to be like, oh, yeah, me too. Like I've had that experience or a similar experience to you too. And the only way for people to connect like that is to hear each other's stories. So my book, yes, it's, personal finance, but it's through personal stories. And so I would, listen, Netflix, hit me up. If y'all want, we can do a series. We can do a movie. There's so much in there that I think, it reminds me of like taking real issues that young people are facing and turning it into a series that, you can really get serious about talking about these issues, but in a way that you mix it with entertainment so that it's not such a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, it was definitely like when you did the chapter about, talking about you rack up, like I was getting like, those movie montages where the girl's like just walking into stores, putting her credit down, and like Rihanna's playing in the background. It's like, yeah, you're walking with like bags from like the stores. Oh, I'm feeling good. And then also, and then you get like the record drop of like, oh no,
credit card bill came in the mail today. Oh, snap. Yeah, no, but it's funny because that was literally my life. Like my freshman year in college, I was walking across campus. Somebody had a clipboard and was calling me over and said, hey, do you want a credit card for students? A student credit card would be great. You can buy your textbooks, your laptop, everything you need, and then you just pay it little by little. Now, in the book, I talk about this, but this was before the Credit Card Act of 2009, which has now made that illegal. Credit card companies cannot station themselves on college campuses and, solicit student applications in exchange for gifts. That's just illegal, as it should have been all those years ago. But I started college in 2008, so it was right before the Credit Card Act.
And you're too early for you, Yanely.
Hey, you're too early, man.
All right, so if folks want to find out more about you, more about the book, where should they go?
Yes. Okay. MindYourMoneyBook.com. The book is called Mind Your Money, insightful stories and strategies to help you reach your #money goals. And if you want to follow me on social media and keep up with my travels, when I go, to speak about the book or to go to schools or to communities, you can follow me anywhere, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, at MissBeHelpful, MissBeHelpful.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Yanely. And that'll do it for another episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe. That way you'll get new episodes as soon as they're available. And if you have a spare moment, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review, which would help other exceptional folks like yourself discover the show. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.